Welcome everyone to another Q&A on the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord. We've got John Vervaeke back. Thanks, John, for being here.
Always a pleasure. And I want to just thank you for, and I've also been thanking the participants. I want to thank you for all the live Q&As you've been doing with some of my friends and interlocutors, like with Paul and Layman and Jordan and Chris and Guy. They've been wonderful. I've been deeply appreciative of it, and I know they have enjoyed it very much. So I just wanted to thank you guys for doing that. I really like the direction that is taking.
Yeah, we've been having a great time with the guests have all been amazing. They've been very generous with their time, and the questions have been great. So and thank you for your voices with Vervaeke, which have queued them up. So yeah, this is it's been fantastic. So everyone, how we've been doing it, if you could queue up your questions in the event text, which is the text channel right above this channel. If you want me to read your question, then let me know. Otherwise, I'll assume you want to read your own question. Now, we're going to start off a little bit different tonight. So in the Religion That's Not a Religion structure channel, a bunch of our members have been working very hard on a document where they've been putting together basically a proposed, ideas for a proposed structure, developing the ideas for a structure of the religion that's not a religion. And I sent it to John last week, and he's had a chance to look it over. And so we'd like to start off by chatting about that for a little bit. And I think some of the people who have been working on that are here. I see I'm sorry, I never know how to pronounce your name. Anteleshiel is here. Chevrani is here. I think Velasquez worked on it. Strawn's worked on it. Sorry if I've missed anyone, but a lot of people have been working on this document and doing a fantastic job.
So could I first say something about it in general, Brett?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
So first of all, I was very impressed by it, and I've mentioned this to Brett already. And of course, I'm going to continue to work on this project and talking to people about it and working with Jordan and Chris. But in addition to the carefulness and the sophistication of the thought that I'm seeing here, this actually, it also in practice, it enacts and it exemplifies something that's really important to me. Because how can I put this? I don't want this to be in my hands. I want to participate in it, and I'm going to theorize about it and try and create ecologies of practices and theoretical structures around it. But this, with all of you, this is taking on a life of its own beyond me, and that is excellent, because that is exactly what it needs to be if it's going to have any chance of viability. This has got to move to something that over which I do not exercise anything like ownership or authorship. I hope I get to always have an important participatory role. But the fact that this is being taken up by a community in this vital and vibrant way, that's really, that for me, it is what is most impressive about this document. Again, not to take away from both its structure and its content, which are excellent, but the actual performance of this and what it's enacting and exemplifying is, I think, what is most impressive to me about this.
Well, thanks so much for that. I know some of the people are here. Are there any questions that you guys want to bring up with John about your document or draw attention to certain points to discuss?
Yeah, I think one question that I have for you, John, is do you think we're taking the right tack in kind of discussing it and breaking it down? Are we focusing on the right things first, or are we maybe jumping the gun on certain areas?
So far, I think that this is going exactly on the right tack. So, I mean, the one thing that I suppose I would add as a potential maybe subcategory is I think
John, sorry, I think you have a fan in the background that's making a bit of noise. Is it?
It's somebody else who's left their mic not muted.
Mahaley, you've got. I'm gonna mute you, Mahaley. Sorry, sorry, Mahaley, you're muted. But if you fix the problem,
So
come back. Yeah, it may have been. I think it was another. It may have been another member too. So I think you're okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things. So I would just put an additional thing. I mean, there's the concretization, the conditions, the propositions, obviously, and they're scaling it. Retnar as an unending process is fantastic. But I would welcome a category around something like the ongoing dialogue or discourse or reciprocal reconstruction between Retnar and science, particularly cognitive science. One of the things that I think the religion that's not a religion should be constantly, because you got that it's an unending process, it's open-ended, but I think it should always be responsive to what cognitive science is telling us about our meaning-making machinery, both within individual and distributed cognition. So I would recommend that as an addendum to that, to what you've done so far. What do you think of that as a proposal?
I personally think it's great. I think there's been a lot of healthy tension and conversation about the relationship with science. I think we've probably spent an inordinate amount of time talking about physics and all the fun philosophical stuff that gets you into a rabbit hole. But ultimately, I think that's something that makes a lot of sense. Kind of repairing that relationship between the two, or I think, as you put it, reconstructing it is a worthwhile aim.
Yeah, because we would hope that something like the religion that's not a religion would be that its attempt to reverse engineer psychotechnologies and ecologies and practices would be informed by sort of the best science we have, the best cognitive science we have, like I said, about the various mechanisms of meaning making that we're trying to exact. So that was the only thing that sort of came to my mind as a lacuna that I thought needed to be addressed.
Awesome, that's great to hear.
Anyone else from the Ritner committee want to jump in before we get to the general questions?
So if maybe I could ask. I mean, I have to be careful with my time, but I mean, this project is very dear to me. And again, I'm not trying to reclaim ownership, and I definitely don't want to be doing anything like that. So what I'm saying is, in what way can I be of service to this project, especially since it is taking on a life of its own? I mean, I'm happy to do this. I'm happy to look at draft proposals or talk to people and give feedback, like whatever I can do to help.
I mean, I will speak as a participant, but I think that is very much appreciated. I think your involvement in it is something that I think almost everyone wants. Again, I don't think anyone would be concerned with you trying to grab the reins or anything like that. I think it's we respect you and your work, and so your input is certainly something that we take into heavy consideration, or at least I can speak for myself. I know I do.
Okay, well, thank you for saying that. Like I said, I'm happy to do this again. Let me just put it more concretely. I'm happy to do this again and again, as much as is helpful to you guys. So please consider that as an open invitation to ask for my collaboration. Awesome.
I guess one question I'll ask is, was there anything specific that the draft that Brett shared, is there any kind of big takeaways or points of feedback that you have from what you've seen so far?
So, I mean, I've been talking about this with Tim Bishop, and this has been coming up to, and I think, again, it's an addendum to the scaling thing. So I've been talking more and more about two things, about scalability and sustainability, and what would it take to make this not only scalable, but sustainable. I don't mean in terms of an idea, because ideas have a certain sustainability, but as as a community of communities of practice. And so that's also something that it would be good if people started turning their attention to. I'm very interested in the whole idea about how this might not only move between sort of layers of society, etc., of that, but how it could be. I don't want it. We don't want it to fall into the pattern. Sorry, this language is sounding so pretentious, and I'm really hesitant about it. It would be good if this is succeeding. It would be good if it didn't fall prey to what happened with Comte's work. Right, he set up all of these secular churches, and it was very, very sort of popular during his lifetime, and then they quickly faded away as soon as he was gone. That's, by the way, why not having this tied to me in particular is very, very important to me. So the issue of sustainability might be one you want to add to the scalability issue.
Yeah, I think that's something that we've had a lot of conversation about as well. Because to your point, it's not just a matter of scale; it's kind of persisting itself. It's how do you keep it continually evolving? How do you make sure it's not static? That it kind of retains that dynamic character and essence. And I think that's something that is a good point to call out. That we should focus not just on the scale, but also on kind of the existence and perpetuity, keeping itself alive.
Yeah. So yeah, making it as autopoetic as possible would be really, really welcomed, I think.
Yeah, and I think we've also raised. Well, I've raised the concern that as Rutnar grows, we also need to put something in place to prevent degeneration of culture. Because as it is now in this server, we've got a very good culture where
Right.
it's very cooperative, and we're all just trying to, we're all striving towards truth. But I've seen that when communities grow too quickly, for instance, they kind of invite a load of they don't acclimatize new members to the wholesome culture quick enough.
Yeah, I agree. And so maybe I mean some of the people that need to be talked to, and it would be good if we could get him on here. I haven't done a specific voices with Vervaeke with him, but maybe I should. Which is Zach Stein. Because of the ideas about trying to get a clearer understanding of the relationship between a revised notion of education and enculturation, just what you're talking about. So what would be the educational aspects of this community such that, there is a sustainable form of enculturation to keep the standards that make the community such a success right now. I think that's important. So I'm going to be talking with Zach again, but it's going to be with Andrew and Zach. But maybe even if he's not on Voices with Vervaeke for a while, we might want to have him in because his ideas and my ideas are very convergent. But he's also got a lot. He's put a lot of thought into stuff that I haven't thought of as deeply about. But his idea of his work on education between two worlds, I think might be very relevant to Ritnar. Very relevant.
Right, yeah, I can definitely reach out to Zach to see if he'd come on.
And he's such a wonderful person too. I mean, oh my gosh, he's such a wonderful, wonderful person. But I mean, I think that please don't misunderstand me. I don't think that's like a comprehensive answer to the problem that was just brought up. But I think it's a good place to start to wrestle with it.
John, I had a follow-up question to this about scaling and degradation. Your lecture series really changed my life, and I would tell everybody I knew about it. And it was interesting hearing some of the feedback from some of my friends. They come back and be like, well, I feel like he's saying something significant, but he uses so many big words. What is this perspectival, this, and da, 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 da. And then I would kind of try to put it in like kind of worse precision, like I kind of less signal words, but people be like, oh.
Right, yeah.
And so I'm wondering, just in terms of scaling, are there different roles in terms of the signal to noise, the precision? And could you maybe just speak to that? How important are the words and the quote unquote lies to children that teachers use to get knowledge across?
Well, it's not only lies to children. I mean, Elgin in her book, True Enough. I mean, even in an advanced textbook on physics, you'll see a diagram of the atom that is, of course, appreciably false. It's static. It represents particles as if they're little round spheres, definite locations, all kinds of stuff that just turn out to be false. But we can't do without these diagrams because we can't get people to understand how to practice the physics without them. And so I think there's the indispensable fictions that amplify reality so that we can see patterns that we otherwise couldn't see. I mean, Plato did it first with the Republic, and you do this city, you blow up the human psyche to the level of a city, so you might see things that you otherwise wouldn't see. So I think this is a comprehensive thing. We first of all have to acknowledge as part of, at all levels, children to adults, we're doing this. So there's more of a continuum there. So that's the first thing I would say. Secondly, I've been trying to think about this, and there's somebody, I have a recording with him, and I'm going to put it on with Voices with Vervaeke. And this is Zeke's work. Now, he took a bunch of my, I think it's the first 16 or 17 of the videos, and he made 15-minute animated versions of the arguments. And I think they are massively successful. It's on Think Big Animation. And like I said, I'll release the video in a bit, and then perhaps you could also have him on Voices with Vervaeke. Because people that can do that are really important. I'm also meeting with Ethos Ananda because he approached me and he said, I want to do a bunch of videos with you. I've released one so far, we've done another, where it's about trying to make it simple without, of course, making it stupid. So I take this project very seriously, but I think it's doable. I think the work that Zeke did on Think Big Animation. Have you seen any of those videos? They're excellent, and I think they're really, really excellent at taking. They don't, of course, they can't capture all of the argument, but they get the core and then they present it in a multi, like well, I was going to say multimodal, but that would be confusing. That's a term from psychology. It's both a visual. There's a visual presentation as well as just a verbal presentation because it's animated. That really improves the intelligibility and the accessibility of it. So I think that there is, first of all, a way of philosophically grounding this in the work of people like Elgin and others. True, like I said, the book True Enough, and then linking that to the specific project of creating these bridging forms. And I take Zeke's work on Think Big Animation as exemplary of how to do exactly that. Have any of you seen it? Any of the videos?
I haven't, but I'll certainly look out.
So that's definitely something. He did. I think he went all the way up to Augustine in connection with the series. Yeah, definitely. I highly recommend them. Take a look at them.
Excellent. All right, so we have some questions queued up. So Helix, you have a question. Helix, are you? Okay, I'll read out. So if religio is like the spirituality of religion, where is the spirituality in religion, and what else is there besides spirituality in religion?
So that's an excellent question. I think the spirituality in religion is the way in which you have rituals and mythos for accessing and activating and accentuating religio and celebrating that as a significant experience, both individually and communally. I think there's other things in religion other than the spirituality.
Hello? Sorry, my
Oh.
computer was having a bit of technical difficulty. I actually missed it. Did you start asking my question?
I did, but did you want to say it in your own words?
Yeah. Do you mind?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great,
Oh.
Thank you so much. But before I get to my question, John, I briefly met you in Kingston, Ontario, and you were wondering about the state of your tenure, and I heard that you actually got it, so I just really wanted to congratulate you on that. That's really special that you got that.
Thank you very much. Where did I meet you in Kingston? Did you come to
The screening room. I went up to you when you were sitting alone. I shook your hand and I tried to get as many questions as I could at you.
That was a lot of fun that day. We were doing another one, and then of course COVID struck. But maybe we'll do another one at some point. Anyways,
that would be awesome.
I'm diverting you. What's your question?
Yes. Okay, so a few of us were talking about religio last night.
Yeah.
And I was feeling a bit confused about it, and so we kind of came to somewhat of a conclusion. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it. So, if religio is like the spirituality of religion, where's the spirituality in religion specifically, and what else would there be besides spirituality in religion?
Yeah, so I did begin that answer, but you weren't present, I think, because of your computer difficulties.
Yeah,
So
thank you.
No problem. I'm just gonna ask for everybody else's indulgence as I begin again. I think that the spirituality in religion is, the set of ritual practices that are designed to access, activate, accentuate, and celebrate religio, both individually and collectively. And I think that whereas spirituality tends to point more towards an individual cognition, religion tends to point more towards distributed cognition and to what Layman calls overflow. And I think that's correct. I think spirituality also, you notice that I'm putting them on a continuum, right? I think that spirituality puts more of an emphasis on the cultivation of wisdom, and religion tends to put more of an emphasis on the cultivation of worship, that the idea that people are getting into a right relationship of proper reverence towards what is ultimate, and that doesn't have to be supernatural. There are religions that don't have a supernaturalistic element in them. And I think religion also does a lot more work than spirituality does in tackling the problems of scalability and sustainability. And in order to do that, I think religion does a lot more work on creating communal credo, shared sets of paradigmatic pictures and propositions that are supposed to constrain individual spirituality so that the group spirituality is always available. So did that start to answer your question? Maybe you want to follow up.
Well, I'm still scratching my head on what religio is, even though that was a beautiful demonstration of maybe the difference between spirituality and religion is.
Oh, okay, so great. So religio is not itself intended to designate or denote spirituality or spiritual practices. Religio is supposed to designate the sense of connectedness that relevance realization affords us. The way the agent and the arena belong together and generate affordances, generate participatory knowing that grounds perspectival knowing. And the fact that for adaptive reasons, that sense of connectedness comes with it comes with very powerful affective and motivational processes attached to it. We seek out connectedness and we are distressed when we lose the connectedness. And so the religio, the Latin word religio, originally means to bind things together, to connect things together. But I chose the word precisely because I think what is exacted and appreciated in all the senses of the word appreciation, on all the senses of the word appreciation, what is exacted and appreciated in religion, even in spirituality, is religio. I think when we are trying to use individual practices of transformation and the cultivation of wisdom to enhance religio, that's spirituality. When we're doing that, plus the other things that I said go into religion, I think that's what religion is. So I don't think of religio itself as spirituality. I think when we use mythos, rituals, stories, sets of practices, so that we can pursue religio for its own sake, rather than instrumentally for our cognitive agency and survival. So the analogy I use is your capacity for hearing sound and being connected to sound. That's like religio. Music is spirituality. Music is playing with the machinery by which you are connected to the sound, making it intelligible, right? So you have a lot of adaptive advantage, the degree to which you can make sounds intelligible to you and connect via sound to your environment. And so you have all this machinery for making your ability to hear work very well. But sometimes you step apart from that and you play with the machinery of hearing and you listen to music. You're playing with the machinery of hearing and salience, and you're doing it for its own sake, precisely because it's intrinsically valuable to you, because it carries with all of this motivational and affective power. So if sound, the ability to hear is religio, as in the analogy, but the ability to listen to music is spirituality. And then the ability to do it with a bunch of people, make music together, would be religion. How's that? Is that helpful?
That's really good, and I just want to concretize to see if I understand it. To use technology as an example, if religio is the sense of connectedness or how to connect, would technology then be a form of spirituality because it's a mechanism to connect, or would technology be a form of religio?
I would think of technology being typically a way in which we enhance religio, and therefore it's part of religio. I think when we're doing things like this, when we're using technology to enhance the religio for its own sake and celebrating it the way we're doing here, I think now it's starting to move into spirituality.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you. That was an excellent question.
And John, sorry, is it possible that you get a little bit closer to your mic? It's just, you're sounding a little distant. I think, but still,
is this better?
Yes, that's better. Thank you. So,
Great.
Kelmy, you have a question, Kelmy.
Yes. Hi. Hello. I'm Kelmy. I'm kind of new to your work, John, but I'm also Kelly Myers on YouTube, just to make that connection.
Oh, hi.
Hi. Hello. I'm really grateful for your work, of course, and I see this discovery of your community and your work as sort of like a mile marker on the path that I've been on. So I'm pretty happy to be diving in. But
could I just interrupt for a sec? I wanted
Sure.
to thank you. I wanted to thank you for the questions you've been. Kelly's been in the Sangha for the morning classes on meditation and contemplation, the cultivation of wisdom. I just wanted to thank you. Your questions are often, I think, very valuable to the rest of. They're valuable to me, but I get a very clear sense that they're valuable to other people who are attending the session. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you for taking questions. I think that's very important for building the community. So it's definitely mutually appreciated. I guess I typed my question out, so I guess I'll read it. But just to preface that, this has kind of been churning in my mind from a lot of the ideas from people like, for example, Brett Weinstein has been making me think about these things. So I don't know if you've already discussed it somewhere, but I've been thinking about the idea of leadership.
Yeah.
So my question is how you see leadership fitting within the framework and observations in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis and your other discussions. So I'm thinking that the process of reciprocal opening would be like contributing to the skills you need for leadership. But I'm also wondering if the processes associated with the meaning crisis itself is perhaps like a driver of poor leadership and lack of leadership in our societies. And I guess as an example, I feel like I'm not like a leader, so to speak. But now with your ideas, it's occurred to me that that might be the way I'm interacting with the world is just not giving me, it's narrowing me in to where I can't be a leader. I don't see my ideas as being worth having confidence in, I guess. So maybe you could just sort of speak about that, maybe starting with like a definition of leadership, because I really don't know that I have a firm grasp on really what it is in like a scientific sense.
So first of all, that's a fantastic question, and it's a question that unfortunately I haven't put as much time into in order to give you a deep answer. The question is deep, and so what I want to do is indicate, first of all, my ignorance because of lack of work, because I have concentrated on something that is close enough to that that it takes my attention, which I've been concentrating a lot on the question of what it is to be a good teacher, because I'm a teacher, and therefore that has taken up when I'm sort of thinking about the relationship. I tend to, and I don't think this is correct, so I'm admitting a mistake. I tend to assimilate, I think unconsciously, the question of leadership to the question of mentorship and the question of pedagogy. And that's a mistake. So this is something I've got to put more thought into. I have put some thought into it, but only in a negative fashion, in that I'm very concerned with the way in which all of us, I mean, the community, I'm not trying to be presumptuous. I mean, the people I'm talking to, like Jordan and Guy, there's a model here that Weber would call charismatic leadership. And the thing about that is that seems to fit naturally with the kinds of communities where we're really emphasizing emergence and innovation and transformation. And charismatic leadership, right, it was emphasized a lot by Weber. So charisma is basically, and this is coming out of the discussion I'm having with Jennifer Steller and some of the people on awe, a charismatic leader has the capacity, I would say, to introduce something like awe or wonder into people, but also resolve it for them, so that they don't slip into horror or a sense of disconnection or a sense of being overwhelmed. And so they tend to trigger a kind of reverence, because reverence is the virtue for responding to awe, I would argue. And I think so. Charismatic leadership is so closely associated with communities where emergence and innovation are emphasized, precisely because that form of leadership it gets its existence out of inducing wonder and insight and transformation in people. So that makes sense to me. But the issue that I have typically is that charismatic leadership is also the one that has the greatest potential to feed into narcissism, to feed into sort of dangerous versions of populism and things like that. So, sorry, Kelly, I know this is not a complete answer. And I've already told you, I put inadequate work in, and I'm ignorant. I'm trying to show you all I'm doing is showing you where I have put thought in. And so the alternative to the dangers of charismatic leadership, of course, is institutional leadership, where people have authority to lead because of the office that they have achieved through some kind of meritocracy, whether or not it's a real meritocracy or just a sham one, but whatever. Now, the advantages of institutional leadership is it's much harder for it to go off the rails into sort of a cult-like thing. But the disadvantages of institutional leadership is precisely that we lose an orientation towards emergence and innovation. And so I'm trying to understand, is there a way in which we could get what I saw with the scientists who are doing the work with the rovers on Mars, and I've talked about this in a couple of my talks, and it's in some of the work I'm doing with Dan Chiappi, they have this style of leadership in which there's a constantly shifting form of leadership, and it's constantly shifting between expertise and something like a charismatic style. Like, is there a way in which we can create a dynamic small world network organization of people in which we can sort of get the best or split the difference between institutional leadership and charismatic leadership? And so that's a question that's on my mind, because I think it's integral to trying to prevent a lot of what we're working on here together from going off in some very dangerous directions. And again, we all have to be careful of this, because where we're in situations of an emphasis on emergence and innovation and transformation, and and we are, I think rightfully so, appreciative of charismatic individuals who are sources of insight and innovation. We have to be very careful about the dangers of narcissism, inflation, hubris, and the degeneration into a cult. But I also don't want to just go and say, well, then we have to go into institutional leadership, because that's got us a lot of the problems that we're trying to break out of. So sorry, that was a bit rambling, but as I said, my thought in this is very immature, and I'm just trying to give you what thought I have had about leadership right now.
Well, that's definitely some interesting ideas that I think it actually clarifies one thing that I was referring to with what Brett Weinstein talks about. He kind of identified what I think is the same a same trend that you're pointing out in the concept of charismatic leadership. He's identified that many would-be leaders are what he says are trapped in the gig economy.
Yeah.
And so that kind of feeds into that. But I do wonder, because as a society we need institutions, and so I wonder if I would encourage you to maybe still find that balance, because, like, for instance, anyone who joins the religion that's not a religion, maybe we would want them to transform into someone who could be suited to lead our society,
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And so I was only I am oriented towards the balance. I think what Paul said about individuals innovate, but institutions preserve, right? And so I think that's very relevant. I guess I've tended to overemphasize the charismatic in my presentation to you, because that's my own self-reflection and self-criticism. I'm concerned about that, about falling into that myself, and so I tend to give that a little bit more priority in my thinking right now. So
thank you.
That's why.
All right, next up is Jack.
Hello. My question is, it can be quite overwhelming sometimes to have a chronic condition that is rather disabling and disorienting, and it can be hard to softly communicate with maybe the part of our body where the chronic condition resides, or to integrate communication throughout the body. It can feel like a blockage, and can be a lot of anger that results, especially if you have a chronic condition at a young age, when your body is supposed to be spry and young.
Oh, yeah.
And particularly when the chronic condition is flaring badly. It can be easy to garner a lot of anxiety and freak out, rather than doing the right thing, which would be to go through it, I would say, mindfully. So what are some techniques that we can apply?
Okay, so I can speak to this personally, if you don't mind, because I think that's that's the kind of response that's needed here. I suffer from a chronic condition. I suffer from Meniere's disease.
Hello?
And hello? Are you still there?
Yeah, sorry.
I suffer from Meniere's disease. This is a chronic condition. It's incurable, in which my inner ear will inexplicably fill up with fluid. It will cause me pain, dizziness, a loss of hearing, vertigo, and often tremendous vertigo, like fall down vertigo, where I will fall down. And so the Meniere's disease also leaves me with unremitting tetanitis in my left ear. And because of the way aversive conditioning happens, once I have an attack or two, I get very powerful agoraphobia, because it becomes very difficult for me to go outside, because part of my brain is trying to keep me inside where I'm safe in case I get an attack. And so I have to not only challenge the initial onset of an attack, I would rather have I've had in pain. I've been in a hospital, and it looked like I was potentially going to die from an infection, and I've had intense pain. I would take that over a Meniere's attack any day of the week. And then, so I not only have to deal with that, I have to deal with the very rapid way in which it conditions agoraphobia, and to challenge that continually. So, and then, as you said, this goes into my sitting. Every time I sit, there's a lot of body armor in the left side of my head and my neck and my body, because there's a part of me that's always trying to be hyper vigilant for my ear, deal with the pain, right? So all of this is ongoing for me. So I understand very, very directly and clearly what you're talking about. So what that has meant for me is, first of all, I don't want to sound trite, but when I get remission, and I get times in which I'm not as challenged by Meniere's, I think of those as the most important times for my practice, precisely because my practice won't be as deep when I get a flare-up. And then I try to adjust it accordingly. I try to reduce. So, there's I teach like a progression of skills in the course, so in the mindfulness practice. And when I'm having a flare-up, I don't pursue the deepest, most profound practices. I drop back down to the basic practices that I have practiced the longer, and therefore have a lot of stability to them. I also practice with making my reaction in my body to the Meniere's, not the Meniere's itself, but my reaction, my embodied and in-minded, the way my mind is tense and tries to ignore that, and the way my body is tense and tries to control it. All of that secondary reaction and some of the emotion around it, like the attendant anxiety, I sometimes will make that especially when I'm not in the middle of an intense flare-up, I will make that the object of my meditation. And I will direct metta towards it, or I will direct vipassana towards it. And again, not with the intent of curing it or making it go away, the disease, but realizing that the secondary reaction is something over which I bear responsibility, and that I can learn to let go of. And that so I can make a space, again, not for cure, because what I have is not curable, but I can make a space for more adaptive responses that are more consonant with my longitudinal ability to engage in the practices I want to engage in. Was that at all helpful? Because I'm deeply sympathetic with what you're talking about.
Yes, that was helpful.
Do you want a follow-up question? Because I take what you're saying very seriously.
It's the agoraphobia part. Like, it's hard to, it can be hard to go out, and it can be easy to develop a lot of anxiety about like what's going to happen if there's if there's no access to help or something.
So part of what I've tried to do is I've tried to do imaginative exercise to say, well, what would happen if because I have had attacks when I'm out. And they've often, so it's, human beings are very bad at what's called effective forecasting. We're very bad at actually predicting our affective response to situation and what the circumstances will be in that situation. And so one of the things that I've done is I've tried to collect instances where I've been out and I've had an attack. Like I try to sort of create them as memorials, and that as bad as they were, it wasn't so bad. Like, so when I started teaching, let me give you a concrete example. When I started teaching the mindfulness class, I was very worried about having a Meniere's attack as I was teaching it because I thought that would be very disruptive. And of course, I did have one. And then I realized, no, rather than people sort of abandoning me, when I shared it with them and I shared how the practice is helpful to me and how it can be a chronic illness can be integrated with the practice, I got a tremendous amount of support. Now that doesn't mean I didn't have another attack, because I did. But what it meant was all the huge narrative that I've built around the narrative of rejection and the rejection and the narrative of failure, I was able to address that pretty comprehensively. And so building up, because you can't do it when you're in rumination. You can't do it when you're in rumination. Building up outside of rumination a record of where you have been outside and there has, right, either virtually or literally, and there has been an attack and you are nevertheless, right, it hasn't been as terrifyingly bad as your fear makes it seem. I have found that a very helpful technique.
Right. Mark, you've got a question for John.
Hello, John. It's good to talk to you again. I appreciate you staying late last time for my question, even though you didn't know it was mine. So that was nice.
It's great to hear from you. As always, I want to thank you for all of the ways you contribute to the Sangha.
Well, I'm glad I can be of some service there. It's a lot of fun, and I really appreciate the lessons. I'm learning a lot. And my question is actually kind of about this. So there's two sort of core problems that I've always had in terms of that I've always seen with meditation. One is engagement, right? It's hard to get people to agree to do it and put in the work and spend the time. But even when they do that, a large number of people seem to fail to get mostly what I'm referring to is the second order effects out of it. The stuff you talk about around people see you and they ask if something's changed about you, sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I've broken this down into camps. So one of the things I think meditation is doing for you specifically is providing you with perspectival flexibility.
Yep, very much. Yep.
And that's just engagement, right? If you engage, you should get that just following the steps or following some method.
Yep.
But then the other end of this is something I'm sort of playing with as an idea called engaging in continuous sampling. And the engagement in continuous sampling would be something like the ability to do the integration of the meditation into the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And so this is more of a cog-sci question, which is one reason why I didn't ask it in the meditation itself. So I'm wondering if you have any answers or pointers in terms of how we can facilitate the meditation experience integration more easily and make it more accessible for people.
You should be happy to know that experiential sampling technique is a technique that's being used in psychology and cognitive science as a way of trying to get that deeper transformation that you're talking about, the second order effects. I like that way of naming them, by the way. You're aware of the traditional thing. The traditional thing is, the practice of the precepts and regularly practicing the integration as you come out of the practice. And then the tradition also talks about, creating the triggers, specific situations, putting things in your pocket, or some people have timers that go off periodically. And when that happens, you do the 1 or 2 breath meditation. You do the and then you see which aspect of mindfulness could be applied in this situation. And then you also do the other, when you do spontaneously have insight or flexibility, or somebody notes that in you, you take a moment to write it down and note it down. Because relying on your memory it won't work. It won't work. It won't work. Oh yeah, I'll remember that. No, you won't. No, you won't. So I think trying to create triggers throughout the day in conjunction with doing the integration practices, the promises, and making the commitment on a regular basis, especially in a state that bridges out of a seated or a moving practice. I think that having the ecology of practices, and especially having moving practices, trains the brain to apply mindfulness in interaction as opposed to just being inside an introspective space. I think that. I know for me that the places where the transfers happened first were the places that were afforded by the Tai Chi Chuan rather than the Vipassana itself or the Metta. There's a lot of things we could do. There's a lot of things that have been recommended by the tradition, and I've just mentioned them to you. I think that there are some existing apps out there that are also designed to both sample people, get them to quickly record, and also to provoke them to do moments of integration. So I think it's possible, if we have an ecology of practices, we could also bootstrap a lot of the traditional ways of practicing integration and probably improve their efficacy.
All right, Strawn, you're up next. You've got, I think, 3 questions here, but we're running quickly low on time. So could you please just stick to one?
They're all connected though, so I think John can answer them together. But I wanted to ask about suchness and moreness within the context of engineering symbolic sufficiency. So the 3 that I wanted to connect is suchness to thingness as moreness is to nothingness? And then does suchness speak to the parts and moreness speak to the wholes, such that one can refer to discrete parts and continuous wholes? And then finally, I was reading up on Chinese metaphysics, and I discovered that Wu Wei has an opposite, Yu Wei. And if you're familiar with Yu Wei, could you tell me if Yu Wei is to suchness as Wu Wei is to moreness?
Yeah, so I don't know about Yu Wei. I would like to know more about that. That's the first time anybody's ever mentioned it to me in 29 years of practice. So that's pretty astonishing. Well done for you. That's great. So I'd like to know more about that. So I can't comment on the third, but the suchness to thingness and the moreness to nothingness. Did I get that right? Is that the right map? Right. So let me work with that one, because I think I think there's a reason why you presented that first, because I think that's the foundational one. So I tend to think of the suchness as the mystery that is found in individuation, and the moreness as the mystery that's disclosed in participation. I definitely think of the suchness as moving into instantiation, and whereas the moreness is moving into not instantiation, but something more like emanation. I mean, in the sense of eternity. I think if we take thingness as it was, what was the name of in the Middle Ages? Was it aestheticity? I can't remember the term, but what actually made something a particular thing, and in that sense, they were trying to get at what made it a non-repeatable, non-categorical, raw individual that was instantiated. In that sense of thingness, I would, relate suchness to thingness. And I'm using the word thingness here, the word you use, because I'm hoping that we're agreeing that we're not identifying things with objects. We're not identifying thingness with objects. I'm identifying thingness with the instantiation of a raw individual. And so the moreness with the no thingness, yes, that makes sense to me too. Yeah, because the moreness is what's opening towards, I'm struggling for adjectives here, but the sense of the ground by which all intelligibility emerges or emanates, whichever one you want to talk about. Yeah, the more I think on this, the more I like it. If, again, we don't identify thingness with being an object, because I don't think that's the same, and we don't identify no thingness with being some kind of secret amorphous substance behind everything. Did that answer your question?
Mostly, I think. Well, the thingness, I think we'll have to negotiate a bit further, but I think I'm mostly on board with that. And then, just very quickly, would you say that suchness refers to discrete part and moreness to continuous wholes? The discrete and the continuous dichotomy, is there what I'm getting at?
I don't know. I mean, there's a sense in which it's right, but I have to find. I've been reading one of the Aeneids on the intelligibles, right? And he goes on and on about the dangers of trying to understand individuation and determination in spatial terms, because we're taking something that's This is why I'm sort of resisting identifying thingness with objects, because objects are typically well, maybe not. Maybe if you think about Morton's hyperobjects, but objects, and that comes up in the contrast with hyperobjects. Objects are spatially defined, and I'm really hesitant to think of thingness in terms of spatial distinctions like part and whole. Now, he does propose that it's possible to think of part and whole in non-spatial terms. And I'm really trying to wrap my head around what that means. And he has a lot of confidence that he is making sense, and I get glimmers of that. So, sorry, Strawn, this is going to be sort of a dodgy answer, but it's an honest answer insofar as I think the thingness, if you're trying to talk about the way individuation is a particular determination, a determinateness, and in that sense, a boundedness, but not identifying that with spatial localization and limitation, then I would say yes to what you just said.
Okay, yeah, I think we're mostly on the same page, and that'll be very useful for future questions as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah, could I ask one question? Sorry. I was hoping to. I hope Mark is still here, because I wanted to know if Mark found my answer to his question helpful.
Yeah, I'm still here. I think in the context of the meditative practices, John, that answer was pretty helpful. And if I can indulge a follow-up, I was curious if Cogsci in particular has anything to say about that process, sort of outside of the moving practices in meditation. So for people who can't or won't engage with meditation, what can we do to give them that continuous sampling, that integration phase?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I mean, so there's a lot of discussion about transfer appropriate processing and how you get people to transfer, and creating what are called implementation plans. And implementation plans have this, right? This is how you get people to pursue long-term goals. And the difficulty with a good implementation plan is it's actually, it has to get this sweet spot, this balance between giving people a whole sequence of benchmarks that they move towards, but it has to be integrated with giving them ongoing, immediately applicable coping strategies. Because people also tend to abandon these things when they hit difficulties or problems which they can't cope with. So I think the issue, I think what you're drawing out for me, which I think is very helpful, the issue isn't only triggering people, like I've talked about to you before, but the issue is how can we afford transfer? And that's not just transfer. That's how do we give people the right balance between a sort of schedule of goals and ongoing a capacity for coping with unexpected difficulties and challenges. And that is something that I try to think about as a teacher. And I try to think about the degree to which modeling helps people with coping, whereas involvement to an ongoing community helps people with long-term goals. So that's where I'm trying to get a bit of an answer there.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
How-
Brad, I can take one more question, and then I got to go, if that's okay.
All right. Okay. Actually, sorry, I know there are a lot of people with questions, but I just actually like to give Laureen a chance to ask a question. She just started running a weekly study group on awakening from the meaning crisis, and she has a question coming out of that.
Laureen or Loreen? Is it Laureen? Did I hear you correctly? Is that correct?
Yes, Lorraine. Oh, wait, is she gone? No, she's. Oh, well, okay. I'm gonna read it out.
Well,
I think she.
I just want to thank her for doing that.
That's just coming from the study group discussion of episode 3 of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Continuous cosmos and modern grammar. Can you tell us more about myths and the relevance of grammar as a psychotechnology? In our discussion, I somehow concluded that myths or stories and the usage of the past, present, and future tenses, grammar is relevant to inspire creative insight and the call to action.
Okay, so I should first of all note when I'm talking about grammar there, cultural cognitive grammar, I'm using it as by analogy. I'm using it the way sort of Wittgenstein did. I'm not talking about sort of linguistic grammar, but so I'm not clear on what you said because your question could mean that, but I'm talking more about cognitive grammar. I'm talking about the constraints on conceptual generation, conceptual linkage, and the connections between concepts and perception and practices. So I'm talking about something that's not specifically a linguistic phenomena. And how I think about myths is I think about them, yes, very much as stories, but they are stories that have a central symbolic and ritual aspect to them. And this I talk about this much later in the series. So this isn't just promissory. There'll be more there for you in the series on this. That I think of a symbol is something that affords communication. It affords a relationship between what's inside our current framing and what's outside of it and beyond it. So one instance, should not be reduced to this. One instance of where we need symbols is in the relationship between our conscious and our unconscious processing, because what comes into consciousness has been framed in a particular way, and often we're ignoring important aspects of the environment that need to be brought in, but it's unconscious to us, so we need a symbol that bridges between the unconscious and the conscious. Or the symbol can bridge between our everyday way of framing things and experiences we might have within flow or mystical experience that give us a sense of a more encompassing and deeper contact with reality that's very hard to put into words, and we need to symbolically relate it. Symbols are very important, and I talk about this much later in the series, in bridging between my framing of who I am now and my aspiration to who I want to be. So there's many ways in which symbols bridge between things that we have a sort of clear grasp on and things that we only have, things that we're only ascending towards in our relevance realization and intelligibility. So myths are stories in which symbols play a crucial role for getting us into aspiration, or getting the unconscious and the conscious to talk to each other, or getting our everyday experience to talk to our transformative experiences. And myths present these symbols in a way that is perennially attractive to us. That's what I meant when I said myths aren't about ancient stories from the past. They're about ways of symbolically activating our cognition so that we are capable of picking up on patterns that are otherwise not intelligible or not visible or disclosed to us. And so that's why myth is always bound up with some kind of ritual practice, some kind of regular and reliable practice by which people are trying to transform consciousness, cognition, character, and communitas. Because symbols are only grasped, that's not even quite the right words. Symbols are only living to you. They're only alive in you when they are bound up with, when they are affording and are bound up with processes of transformation. And so I think that what symbols do, what myths do, are create stories that put together dramas of ritual and symbol that actually transform our cognitive cultural grammar so that we can aspire, so that we can engage in self-transcendence, so that we can come to a more fuller form of intrapsychic communication between the conscious and the unconscious mind. That's why I take myth so deeply seriously. And I even wonder about the possibility of post-narrative or trans-narrative myth that doesn't rely on narrative structures. The work that Sally McFagg does on parables, and the way a parable looks like it's a narrative, and it draws you into narrative thinking, and then it blows it apart and undermines it and explodes it, so that you move into a trans-narrative transformation, like the myth of the prodigal son or various Sufi myths. I'm very interested in the possibility that myth might not be necessarily tied to narrative, but typically it has been. So that's my answer to that question. Excellent question. And like I say, there is a lot more discussion, both in the series, later episodes in the series, in the zombie book, in work I'm doing with Christopher Mastropietro on this topic of myth. It is an inexhaustible topic, as it rightly should be.
Well, thank you so much once again for another great Q&A. The questions were all great, and your answers obviously just as engaging as ever. So thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm kind of humbled by this community, and sorry, I don't mean that as false modesty. I mean, I'm grateful and I'm appreciative and I'm impressed, and I guess I'm expressing the hope that I can sort of live up to the sense of responsibility I have to how rich already this community is and becoming. And this is not flattery, I mean it. And so thank you so much. And my strongest encouragement to all of you to keep going on this, because there is something precious. There's a pearl of great price here that we need to savor and treasure. So thank you very, very much. Thank you, everybody.
And thank you, John, and everyone. Tonight we've got at 9:00 Eastern. We've got virtual conversations going, which is sort of like an authentic relating type practice that Lorene is running at 10 p.m. At 10 p.m. we've got a shadow dance, which is an ecstatic dance session that Callie is running. And we've got a lot of other great events throughout the week. So please, everyone, in the announcements channel, the pinned post has a link to our Google Calendar. So we're having more and more events. We're experimenting with rituals. We're experimenting with different types of psychotechnology. So and there are more coming all the time.
All right. Well, I'm going to go. So thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, John, and thanks
John.
everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks, Tyler. Thanks, Tyler, for recording.
Yes, thank you, Tyler. Tyler, I'd like to talk to you again sometime soon, please.
Absolutely, John. I'll reach out.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. That was great. I'm sorry there's so many questions and there's relatively little time, so I'm sorry we can't get to everyone. John's answers are always so complete, so there's a cost benefit there. We don't get quite as many questions, but we get great answers. So please bring your questions. I'll try to prioritize next week the people who we didn't get to in 2 weeks. So the people we didn't get to today. So remind me maybe in the questions and queuing up the questions next time that you didn't get to ask tonight. And so we'll try to make sure everyone gets a chance.